Want help to grow your business? Download BRiN, the world's first business advisor in your pocket. To find out more, visit BRiN.ai or search the App Store today.
G'day, Nils Vesk from Innovate or Die. Welcome to this series where we're going to be looking at ways that you can bring commercial innovation to your organisation and your business for great commercial gain. So you might be thinking, innovate or die, what a serious topic. Well, the reality is, unless we're innovating, we're either competing on price or we're playing catch up, trying to chase our competitors as they go out and capture the market. And innovation is such a crucial key element that we all need in our businesses today. And when I've worked with organisations around the world, there's one common problem that I find, and that is that there are too few innovations and they're just too far apart. And the number one cause behind all of this is our biased perception. The bottom line is the way that we've been taught to think about innovation has skewed the way that we think about innovating and the ways that we can come up with new ideas. And that can either be a good thing or a bad thing. And in each one of our episodes, we're going to be unpacking a model called innovation archetypes. Because if we can understand the biases of the most amazing professional innovators and use their best principles, then we can use that to create great commercial gain in our own organizations. So let's quickly unpack each one of these archetypes and phases so you've got an idea of what we're going to be doing in each episode. And so we have universally 4 phases of innovation when it comes to it. We've got the investigation phase, ideation, iteration, and commercialisation. The investigation phase is all about looking for insights as to where we should be applying our thinking to generate brilliant ideas. The ideation phase is all about coming up with lots and lots of great ideas. And then this iteration phase is all about testing, piloting and prototyping our ideas so we can minimise the risk while increasing our certainty. And finally, we've got the commercialisation phase. This is all about taking our idea, building it, and then selling it to the masses so we can get a good commercial return. And each one of our episodes, we're going to unpack one of these expert archetypes so we can borrow and model them to get some great commercial results. So let's get ready to rock, innovate or die. Welcome to Innovate or Die. In this episode, we're going to be looking about how to innovate like an engineer to create indestructible ideas and innovations. And I'm sure that's something that everyone wouldn't mind having a little bit more of. And I'm really excited about engineering in a lot of different ways, and probably I'm a little bit biased. The fact is that I used to have a father as quite a famous sort of engineer in his own time. And my father was a civil engineer, and I must admit we had a very privileged upbringing as children. We used to travel to some of the most exotic places in the world, places like Tamworth, New South Wales. Now, if you don't know where that is, it's about 5 hours northwest of Sydney, pretty much in the middle of nowhere. And what we used to get the pleasure of doing in our school holidays was to go and visit giant dams that my father had been working on. So my father was a civil engineer and he would design these giant dams. And I'll never forget some of the things that we would learn from my father as being an engineer and the things that... One of the things that he always stressed was the importance of structure. I remember we turned up to look at this fantastic new dam that he'd built, and I think he was kind of excited to see the reaction on his kids' faces. And I remember coming around and we saw this thing, and it was a big part earth, part boulder type of dam with some concrete spill structures and spillways and things like that. And I was sort of mildly disappointed because I was thinking of, images of Hoover Dam in America, giant, huge canyons and things like that. And he could see there was this slight disappointment. He said, in his very East European accent, "Nils, it's not what's on the outside that matters, it's what's on the inside. The structure is most important." So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about part of that structural thinking and functional thinking of what engineers do. And we're going to be looking at 3 kind of amazing things of what I think engineers do amazingly well when it comes to innovation, which we can borrow from. The first one is their functional type of thinking. The second is that they're very progressive in trying to improve things. And the third is that they make things very constructible. And 3 reasons why we should really step into the shoes of an engineer. So the first one is functionality. They don't build things that are going to break down. Engineers build things that are going to last for a very long time, and they think very hard about making sure that it's functional and that it works. Whether that's a process or whether it's a product, whether it's an invention or a gadget or anything like that. The second thing that engineers do very well is that they've got this natural curiosity in ways that how can they make it, of how things work and how they can improve it to make it better. It's something that just never ceases to stop in their thinking. And the third reason why we can really borrow some thinking from engineers and innovating like them is that they know how to make things constructible. That is, they know how to build things, even with limited tools, and yet they can build things that will last for a decade or even thousands of years, if you can think of the Greek amazing stadiums that were built so many years ago. 3 really good reasons. And if you're thinking about who might be a poster child to get your head around who's an engineer, apart from my father, is a guy by the names of James Dyson. Now, I'm sure you've come across the Dyson vacuum cleaner, arguably the world's best vacuum cleaner. Now, Dyson was the guy who took on Hoover and won. And the reason why I love James Dyson was that as an industrial engineer, one of the first things that he used was he actually used a number of other types of archetype type thinking. And the first one that he realised is that there were some frustrations with the existing products. So he was using a Hoover vacuum cleaner, and he'd be going around vacuuming the house, and he'd realise that the more that he would vacuum, the worse the suction became. He thought, that sucks, doesn't it? So, certainly, like it should stay the same. The other thing that he found that was really frustrating was that he would have to replace the vacuum bags from these vacuums every 2 or 3 months and go down to the store and buy some more. What a pain in the ass. So he thought, right, there's some reasons why I should invent a better, more progressive vacuum cleaner. A vacuum cleaner that doesn't lose its suction as I use it. And you could argue that the rest is history. There was a lot of stuff that went on. I think he created 2,000 prototypes until he'd nutted out the final product, a vacuumless, a bagless vacuum that maintains amazing suction. The rest, as I said, is history. So if that helps you get your head around who an engineer might be, I'm sure that can help you to see the commercial value of innovating like an engineer. And one of the first spaces and places that our engineers work really well is around this concept of being functional. If it's not going to work, don't even bother to make it happen. And so engineers have a very logical and linear mind. You could probably say that there might only be a few in the sort of minority that are really abstract and very creative with their thinking, very logical, very mathematical, very clinical around what's the problem, let's come up with a solution, how do we make it stronger, and how do we make it better. And one of the things that many engineers do is to look at creating functional diagrams of a product before they actually go out there and invent it. So to give you an example, let's say, for example, I don't know, if I was an engineer, but I was working with an accounting company, and an accounting company is looking at creating some new product for a property investment sort of program or something like that, they might say, look, let's create a functional diagram around that one. So they might start by saying, what the head little thing is in that they do a mind map. And mind map, for those that don't do it, this is a functional diagram. So we're looking at what are the core functions that this property investment program must do. So the first, we might think about, we want them to inform them about potential opportunities around those different things. In the informing part, we might want to make them look at what the implications are. So we might want to talk about this is how much it's going to cost when you make these things. We want to look about not just the implications, but we want to look about the gains and the benefits. I'm sure there's a few other things there. We might want to inform them about some of the risks that might happen. We might talk to them about, risks if we don't have tenants there, or if you're short in paying your mortgage repayments. We might want to inform them about insurance and things like that. We might then want to have something that relates to making it simple and easy. That is, that they can do it themselves. So maybe we have some sort of, kind of DIY app which enables them to be able to manage and do some certain things themselves. We might want to have some mentoring that goes around this, around what deems a possible thing. We might want to have some referral scheme that refers them to certain real estate buyers or real estate hunters in their particular area, and so on and so on and so on. So essentially what we're doing, some designers and engineers call them bubble diagrams, but essentially it's a functional diagram that enables us to quickly map out what are some of the core functions behind a product, a process, or a service that we might be inventing. So it's a really good space and place to start with in looking at ideas. So let me phrase this up again, because I probably just jumped into this. The engineer sits in the ideation phase, and the ideation phase is all about generating lots of ideas. The engineer, you could almost imagine, is a fairly left brain, linear thinking innovator, as opposed to maybe a right brain, creative advertising genius. So very, very practical and very solid, but it's about generating ideas. So when we're looking at generating ideas, functional diagrams can really help. The other thing that engineers do quite well is they look at functional attributes of things. So if we're to look at what might be some of the specific functions that we need that relate to all of these, it's like we're getting narrower and narrower and narrower. We're breaking it down. And one of the things that often you'll get engineers doing is creating a matrix. And a matrix can simply be done on an Excel spreadsheet or any kind of table, essentially. And what you're looking at is trying to identify what some of the sub-elements or sub-attributes of a problem or a challenge or a piece that you're going to invent might require. So let's say, for example, we've got something here that relates to the benefits piece. And within that functional thing, what we might want to talk about is we might want to talk about negative gearing. We might want to talk about the benefits for residential sort of property prices, property price increases over time, and so on and so on and so on. And it's almost what we want to do is look at what are all of the little attributes that we have in there. If we had something, say for example, this DIY app, we might want to look at, is it for smartphone? Is it for Android? Is there a web version? And all of that type of stuff there. The reason why this is valuable is that we can use it later to do some substitution, where we might go, well, at the moment, we've got some sections which talk about benefits and risks and DIYs. Could we substitute the DIY with something else? Or what if we were to add this onto that? This is part of the value of really identifying subsets and smaller components of, or attributes of problems and attributes of the ideas that you might have. One of the other things that you'll find that engineers do really, really well is that they're very systematic with their thinking. And one of the things that they do is they invent processes. Now, you may be familiar with, obviously, the term flowcharts. I'm sure that's nothing new to you. But flowcharts were actually invented by a mechanical engineer. Quite a while back, it was a mechanical engineer by the name of Frank Gilbreth. And the reason why Gilbreth invented the whole languaging of process maps was to enable people to be able to understand a process. So why you should do it, when you should do it, what steps you need to do, when, where, and how, and whom, and the sort like that. And so what Gilbreth invented to start with was what we'd call, the fancy words is visual nomenclature. That is, shapes that would relate to certain functions and commands. And nowadays there are a whole stack of different types of shapes and forms that relate to different things. There's, some of the simple things that we have is, a square or a rectangle just relates to a step or a process. When we have something like a diamond, it relates to a choice or a decision that needs to be made. There are elements where you've got like a wavy sort of bottom document, which means it's a document. There are some things when you've got a predefined process where you've got another process, you do that. Anyway, there's a whole visual languaging that you can use. And so the value...
To continue enjoying this presentation, download BRiN, the world's first business advisor in your pocket. To find out more, visit BRiN.ai or search the App Store today.